You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio.
Now more from Frank Gaffney.
Thank you for staying with us for Secure Freedom Radio's most exciting interview with a great American, John Bolton. You probably know him as the ambassador to the United Nations under President George W. Bush. In fact, that's just one of his many incarnations in his public service role. He has proven to be, to my estimation, one of the most skillful and accomplished security policy practitioners, it's a mouthful, of his generation, with his service in various senior Justice Department positions in the Reagan administration and top State Department jobs under George Herbert Walker and George W. Bush in their administrations, culminating, as I mentioned, in his most prominent role, that of the man protecting America's interests at the United Nations. Since leaving government, he has become one of the most prominent and certainly one of the most prolific contributors to the debate we need to have, and that he is instrumental in fostering, about national security and foreign policy. His op-eds appear, it seems practically daily in one or the other of the nation's leading papers. Not content with all of that, he's authored a best-selling book, Surrender is Not an Option, and his day job is at the American Enterprise Institute, where he is currently a senior fellow. John Bolton, thank you so much for taking some time to join us at a really epical moment, specifically with respect to Iran. But we're delighted to have you as a guest on Secure Freedom Radio.
Well, thank you, Frank. I'm very glad to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about Iran. These elections, the incredible events that have flowed from them, what is your assessment of the chances for what I think really is needed there, regime change as the ultimate outcome?
Well, I think this is a potentially very historic moment. I agree with you. I think regime change has to be our policy with respect to Iran. It should have been our policy beginning in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution took control. Unfortunately, it has not been, and I think that the people out in the streets of Tehran are woefully outgunned by the Revolutionary Guard, and it's a very difficult situation, compounded by our own president's unwillingness to say or do anything that would be of material assistance to these people seeking democratic freedoms. But make no mistake, this is a weak regime in Tehran. I think it's still possible it could be brought down. I just wish there was more we were doing.
Well, I think this is really the single most important insight. As you know so well, these totalitarian regimes always seem to be absolutely permanent fixtures, and yet actually they are very, very tenuous when the public actually finds it has the opportunity to rise up against them. What should the President of the United States, and for that matter the country, be doing at this moment?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the President himself needs to understand that the policy that he's been pursuing and that explains his relative passivity in the face of this uprising, the policy of trying to negotiate with the regime over their nuclear weapons has to be scrapped. It's just simply not possible it was ever going to succeed anyway. But in light of this, how he could negotiate with Ahmadinejad, Mousavi, you name it, with blood on their hands, I just don't see that as a possibility. Now, I don't think we've seen any evidence to date that the President has realized this, but if he were suddenly to wake up tomorrow morning and understand what was happening, he needs to do whatever he can to provide assistance openly and covertly to the Iranian dissidents, to provide them with information at a minimum. You think back to Ronald Reagan helping Solidarity in Poland. We financed fax machines for Solidarity, sort of the Twitter of
right.
their day. There's a lot we can do in that regard using Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberties, Radio Farda, but also looking for the long term. I mean, we have to be realistic. What's happening in the streets in Tehran and other cities in Iran today may not be sustainable in the face of the immediate regime crackdown, but we should not conclude that that's the end of the battle.
Yeah, John Bolton, of the American Enterprise Institute, formerly the United Nations, where he represented the United States. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio, and I just want to make sure that our audience knows that they can learn more about what you're doing at aei.org, and we'll be happy to link to it at securefreedomradio.org. John, the president's resistance to the course of action that you're talking about, he claims we mustn't meddle, but what is your sense of the actual effect on the people there if we were to line up with the Iranian freedom fighters rather than pursue this effort to negotiate with their regime?
Well, I think there are two effects. Number one, even as he has been visibly, painfully not meddling, the regime in Tehran is accusing us of meddling anyway. So my view would be
damned if you do.
In for a pound. Number two, we know enough from the testimony of people who were imprisoned under communist regimes in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe that it was the West sticking by them, thinking particularly of Ronald Reagan during his administration, yes, that gave them hope and sustenance even under the most oppressive times, that they had not been forgotten. There might not be a lot that the West could do for them, but they knew their struggle was not in vain. And I have to believe that's the case inside Iran as well. I worry now that with no commentary from the United States, perhaps torqued up a little bit in past days, but nothing really visible, that people in Iran are saying, this is hopeless, I don't want to risk my life if nobody's going to give us any assistance.
Yeah, at the very least, demonstrate their solidarity with us. You know, I just have to say there are two papers that have been done recently by one of our colleagues, Claire Lopez, which have been published at the Center for Security Policy's website, securefreedom.org, that I would commend to people, one of which talks about the Iran lobby. One more recently, in fact, just published in the past day or so, talks about the extent to which some of those agents of influence, if you will, from the Iran lobby are now working for the Obama administration. And I think that's almost certainly contributing to this inaction on the part of the president. But I want to just very quickly turn, if I can, to another very troubling front, one you've dealt with extensively, John Bolton, in your years in government, and I know have written extensively about since you gotten out, North Korea.
Right.
We now have a ship that's steaming around with perhaps chemical weapons in it. We're shadowing it with, interestingly enough, the USS John McCain. We have word that there may be a long-range missile pointed in the direction of Hawaii that could be fired as a 4th of July celebration by Kim Jong-il. What quickly would you recommend we be doing about North Korea?
Well, I think we should not engage in this kind of enabling behavior that's paid off for the North Koreans before by bowing to their threats and just begging them basically to come back to the negotiating table. Senator McCain himself said just the other day we should board that ship, should find out if it's carrying weapons of mass destruction and act accordingly. I think we need to act. There's an element of risk, there's no doubt about it, but every time we give the North Koreans a pass, it simply emboldens them to be even more belligerent and continue to threaten peace, not just in Northeast Asia, but in the Middle East as well, where a lot of their trading activity has been.
Yeah, and nobody knows better than you, John, that this was a fight you fought manfully in the previous administration, and I was really struck by the president saying that the previous administration didn't do what he would like to do. Well, he doesn't seem to be doing it either. It's time we have robustness back. I appreciate so much, John Bolton, all the work that you're doing to maintain the flame of freedom and that robustness in your new private sector capacity. We hope you'll be a frequent contributor to Secure Freedom Radio. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
We'll be right back after this.
Keeping you informed on the national security matters that keep you safe. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio.